The last ambassador, Sarah Holt, stood alone on the crystalline platform, suspended above an ocean of stairs. 50,000 delegates from across the Galactic Council filled the chamber, their forms as varied as the stars themselves. Some breathed methane, others existed as patterns of light, and a few resembled nothing more than geometric contradictions wrapped in temporal flux. But all of them, every single one, looked at her the same way, with pity, with contempt, with the patient condescension reserved for children who refuse to understand their place. She had been humanity's voice for 3 years now, standing in this same chamber, delivering the same appeals, hearing the same dismissals. Behind her, projected across the vast holographic display, Earth turned slowly, a blue marble wrapped in white clouds, so small against the infinite dark, home, vulnerable, and according to the Council, no longer sovereign over its own system. The Speaker of the Council, a being called Thexelin, whose crystalline body refracted light into rainbow fragments, raised one angular limb. The chamber fell silent. His voice, when it came, resonated through every translation matrix in the room, cold and absolute. Ambassador Holt, the Council has reviewed your petition. Once again, we must deny it. The asteroid belt resources within your system fall under Galactic Regulation 774. All mineral-rich regions discovered by pre-ascension species are considered shared territory until such species demonstrate technological and social maturity. You do not qualify. Furthermore, your continued expansion toward the outer planets without Council oversight violates the expansion protocols. We will conduct military exercises near your Neptune orbit to remind you of these boundaries. Sarah felt the words land like stones. Military exercises. Near Neptune. The message was clear. Stay in your corner, little humans, or we will remind you what real power looks like. She had practiced her response 1,000 times. The diplomatic phrases, the careful appeals to reason and law, the measured tone that might, just might, reach someone in this chamber who still believed in justice. But as she opened her mouth, something else came out instead, something 50 years in the making. No. The word fell into the silence like a hammer strike. Thexalin's light patterns flickered, confusion or perhaps amusement. Clarify your statement, Ambassador. Sarah stepped forward, her voice steady and clear. I said no. No to your regulations. No to your exercises. No to your authority over our system. For 50 years, we have followed every rule you imposed. We paid the tribute fees you demanded. We restricted our ships to the pathways you approved. We accepted your insults, your mockery, your casual dismissal of our sovereignty. We did all of this because we believed, foolishly, desperately, that you were better than us, that you represented something worth aspiring to. She let her gaze sweep across the vast chamber. But you're not better. You're just older. You've forgotten what it means to struggle, to earn your place among the stars. You've grown fat on inherited power and ancient treaties that favor whoever held the guns 1,000 years ago. You look at us and see primitives who should be grateful for your tolerance, but we see you clearly now. We see empires built on the bones of extinct species who also begged for acceptance. We see the same arrogance that has destroyed 100 civilizations, the same certainty that might makes right. The chamber erupted into chaos. Delegates shouted in 100 languages, their translation matrices overlapping into a storm of outrage. But Sarah's voice cut through it all. This is humanity's final diplomatic transmission. We withdraw from all Council jurisdiction. We will defend our system with whatever means necessary. And if you send your fleets to conduct your exercises near our worlds, you will discover something you should have learned 50 years ago. She leaned forward, her eyes blazing. We are not children. We are not primitives. We are Terrans, and we have been preparing for this moment since the day you first laughed at us. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small device, no larger than her palm. The quantum transmitter had been coded to her genetic signature, waiting for 3 years in case this moment ever came. She pressed it once, twice, 3 times. Across the galaxy, beyond Neptune's dark horizon, something ancient stirred. The chamber's sensors began screaming warnings, energy signatures that shouldn't exist, gravitational distortions that defied known physics. Every military monitoring station in Council space suddenly detected the same impossible readings, all originating from a single point at the edge of the Sol system. Sarah stood perfectly still as alarm klaxons echoed through the chamber. Behind her on the holographic display, a new object appeared. At first it registered as nothing more than a quantum anomaly, a glitch in the sensor data, but as observation platforms across a dozen star systems focused their instruments, the truth emerged. A ship. Massive beyond comprehension, 30 kilometers long, wrapped in dark metal that seemed to absorb light itself, energy readings that matched theoretical output for black hole singularity cores, technology the Council had declared impossible. And beneath its surface, weapon systems that made every military analyst who saw them go silent with dread. The Terran Dreadnought Indomitable Will had been hidden in the dark for 50 years, built in absolute secrecy by generations who never stopped believing in humanity's right to exist. Now it hung in space like a promise fulfilled, its engines beginning to burn with light that outshone stars. Sarah smiled at the chamber, at the delegates who had finally stopped talking, who stared at the displays with something like fear beginning to dawn in their ancient eyes. Humanity, she said softly, is going to war. The architects of defiance, the construction of the Indomitable Will began 53 years ago, 3 years before humanity even discovered the Galactic Council existed. It started not as a weapon, but as a dream, Project Exodus, humanity's desperate plan to build generation ships capable of reaching distant stars. The finest minds on Earth poured their knowledge into designs for vessels that could sustain life across centuries, that could carry civilization itself into the unknown. Then first contact happened, and humanity's dream turned to ash. The Council ships arrived without warning, their vessels so advanced they made Earth's best technology look like carved stone. The beings who emerged spoke in perfect human languages, their translation technology reading neural patterns in real time. They smiled, those who had faces, and delivered their judgment with the casual certainty of gods addressing insects. Earth was not alone. Humanity was not special. They were merely the latest primitive species to stumble into a galaxy that had been civilized for 100,000 years. And like all newcomers, they would follow the rules, pay the fees, accept the limits, and perhaps, if they behaved well for a few thousand years, they might earn a minor vote in council affairs. The leaders of Earth accepted these terms because they had no choice. The council fleets could sterilize the planet from orbit without breaking formation, but in the dark shipyards beyond Neptune, where Project Exodus had been assembling its generation ships in secret, a different choice was made. Director Marcus Chen had spent 20 years building those ships. He had recruited the best engineers, the most brilliant physicists, the kind of people who saw impossible as a challenge rather than a limitation. When the council delivered its ultimatum, he gathered them all in the main construction bay and asked a simple question. Do we accept this? Do we stop building, stop dreaming, stop being human, because someone older and stronger says we must? The answer, delivered in voices from every nation and culture on Earth, was unanimous. No, they would not stop, but they would adapt. If the galaxy wanted humanity to kneel, then humanity would build something that couldn't be forced to its knees. Project Exodus died that day. Project Hammerfall was born in its place. They took the generation ship designs, vessels meant to carry hope across the void, and transformed them into something else entirely. They studied every scrap of council technology they could access, reverse engineering quantum drives and gravitational manipulation systems. They pushed Earth's fusion research into territories the textbooks said were theoretical impossibilities. And when that wasn't enough, they went further. The black hole singularity reactor was humanity's crown jewel, born from desperation and genius in equal measure. The Council had declared such technology beyond reach, too dangerous, too unstable. But humanity's physicists looked at the equations and saw not impossibility, but elegance. They built containment fields that bent spacetime itself into new configurations. They learned to harvest energy from the edge of event horizons, drawing power from the universe's darkest wells, and they did it all in absolute silence. The Indomitable Will grew slowly, assembled from components built in 100 different facilities across Earth's system. Each piece was disguised as civilian infrastructure, mining equipment, terraforming platforms, research stations. The Council's inspection teams saw exactly what they expected to see. Primitive humans playing with basic orbital mechanics, no threat to anyone. They never looked closely at Neptune's orbit. They never wondered why humanity maintained such extensive scientific outposts in the outer dark. They assumed, as they always did, that humans were simply too primitive to hide anything significant. For 50 years, 3 generations of humanity lived double lives. Publicly, they followed council edicts, paid the fees, accepted the insults. Privately, they built. Engineers who designed the vessel's quantum-folded armor never told their families what they really did. Physicists who calibrated the singularity cores signed security oaths that transcended law. Soldiers trained in secret, preparing for a war that might never come, learning to operate systems that pushed human cognitive ability to its absolute limits. The ship's name was chosen by vote, submitted anonymously from every contributing facility.
Indomitable will. It wasn't the most poetic option or the most threatening.
But it captured something essential: the stubborn, defiant, unbreakable human refusal to accept extinction, to bow before power, to stop reaching for the stars just because someone older said we weren't ready. And now, after 50 years of sacrifice and silence, the indomitable will hung in space above Neptune, its engines burning with captured starlight. Inside the command bridge, Captain James Rodriguez stood before displays that showed Council fleet movements across a dozen star systems. He was 63 years old, had trained for this moment since he was 15, and had never expected to actually see it happen. Behind him, his crew of 2,000 souls prepared their stations. Weapon systems that could crack planets, defensive fields that bent the laws of physics, engines that could cross light years in hours. His communications officer looked up, her face pale. "Captain, the Council fleets are mobilizing. 16 battle groups moving toward Sol system. They're treating the ambassador's declaration as an insurrection. Orders are to subjugate Earth and dismantle all human military infrastructure." Rodriguez nodded slowly. He had studied the Council's warfare doctrine for 40 years. They fought with overwhelming force, crushing resistance before it could organize. They had never lost a war because they had never fought an equal. "All hands," he said quietly, his voice carrying through every deck of the massive vessel. "This is the captain. For 50 years, our parents and grandparents built this ship in darkness, believing that one day humanity would need it. They built it for this moment. They built it for you. The Council fleets are coming. They think we're primitives playing with stolen technology. They think one show of force will make us surrender. They don't understand what it means to be human. To be told we're not good enough, strong enough, worthy enough, and to keep building anyway." He touched a control, and across the bridge, holographic displays showed Earth turning in space. Beautiful and fragile and home. "We are the indomitable will. We do not yield. We do not surrender. And when the Council's fleets arrive, they will learn what humans have always known. That strength is not measured by age or technology, but by the absolute refusal to accept that some fights aren't worth fighting. All stations prepare for combat operations. We're going to show them what 3 generations of human defiance can build." The ship's engines burned brighter, and across the galaxy, sensors registered power outputs that made alien strategists recalculate every assumption they held about human capability. The Council's fleets continued their approach, confident in their superiority. They had fought 1,000 wars. They had never met an enemy they couldn't overwhelm. They had never fought humanity. The stars remember. The Battle of Saturn's rings would be studied for generations, not just by humans, but by every species in the galaxy that had ever wondered what happens when arrogance meets absolute defiance. It began with confidence and ended with terror, and in between, the entire galactic order shattered like glass. The Council's first fleet arrived in Sol system exactly on schedule. 16 battle groups representing the combined military might of 37 member species. Their vessels ranged from kilometer-long dreadnoughts to swarms of fighter analogs, each one equipped with weapons that had conquered worlds. They positioned themselves in formation between Jupiter and Saturn. A clear message: we stand between you and Earth, surrender, or we advance. Admiral Krelvox of the Xanthari Imperium commanded the fleet from his flagship, a massive vessel called Eternal Judgment that had never been damaged in 200 years of service. He reviewed the tactical displays with satisfaction. The human ship, this indomitable will, hung in space near Neptune alone and outnumbered 16-1. Its energy signature was impressive, certainly, but the Council had faced impressive before. Power meant nothing without experience, without the tactical doctrine that came from millennia of warfare. He opened a wideband communication channel, his synthesized voice carrying across the void. Terran vessel, this is Admiral Krelvox commanding the Council's First Fleet. You are ordered to power down your weapons and submit to immediate inspection. Failure to comply will result in your destruction. You have 1 standard hour to respond. The hour passed in silence. Then exactly 60 minutes later a response came. Not from the indomitable will but from Earth itself. A voice old and steady, speaking across every frequency the Council fleet monitored. This is Director Marcus Chen, architect of Project Hammerfall. 50 years ago, you told us we were children who needed to learn our place. We learned that peace with you was impossible, that respect would never be earned through compliance, that the only language you understand is strength. So we built something you could understand. We built a ship that represents everything humanity has ever been. Stubborn, defiant, creative, and absolutely unwilling to accept extinction as inevitable. Admiral Krelvox, you asked us to surrender. I have a counteroffer. Leave our system now and we'll let you live. The communication cut off. Across the Council fleet, officers looked at each other in disbelief, then laughter. The humans thought they could threaten the greatest military force in the galaxy with 1 ship? The arrogance was almost admirable. Krelvox issued the order to advance. The fleet moved forward in perfect formation, weapons charging, shields at maximum. They would destroy the human vessel, then proceed to Earth to accept its inevitable surrender. Just another conquered species. Just another day in the Council's eternal reign. The indomitable will began to move. It didn't accelerate like normal ships. It simply was somewhere else. Quantum drives folding space around it in ways that made reality protest. One moment it hung near Neptune. The next it materialized at the edge of the Council's formation, its dark hull seeming to drink the light of Saturn's rings, and then it opened fire. What happened next defied everything the Council knew about warfare. The indomitable will's primary weapons weren't particle beams or missiles, they were gravitational lances, focused singularity projections that reached out and simply crushed whatever they touched. Council shields designed to deflect energy weapons meant nothing. The gravitational forces pulled matter into configurations it was never meant to occupy. Ships folded inward on themselves, their hulls compressed into dense spheres of twisted metal. Krelvox watched 3 of his dreadnoughts die in the first salvo, their death screams cut short as their life support collapsed. He ordered the fleet to scatter, to engage evasive patterns, but the human ship moved like nothing they had ever faced. It wasn't faster, it was everywhere. Quantum shifting through space with precision that suggested consciousness merged with machine. Every time Council vessels attempted to flank it, the indomitable will was already gone, appearing behind them, above them, through them. The human ship's secondary weapons were almost worse, swarms of autonomous drones that emerged from launch bays like mechanical locusts. Each one carried a miniaturized fusion warhead and AI intelligence, sophisticated enough to predict and counter Council defensive systems. They learned in real time, adapting to every countermeasure the fleet deployed, finding weaknesses and exploiting them with mechanical efficiency that felt almost personal. 20 minutes into the battle, Krelvox's fleet had lost half its vessels. The survivors formed a defensive sphere, concentrating their fire, trying to overwhelm the human ship through sheer volume of attacks. For a moment it seemed to work. The indomitable will's shields flared under the assault, energy readings fluctuating. Then Captain Rodriguez activated the ship's final surprise. The black hole singularity reactor didn't just power the vessel, it could be weaponized. Rodriguez opened a targeting channel and released a controlled gravitational pulse, a wave of warped space-time that expanded outward from the indomitable will like a ripple in reality itself. When it hit the Council's defensive sphere, ships didn't explode. They simply stopped being ships. Hulls bent, decks twisted. Crew members experienced localized gravitational stress that made their own bodies enemies. The Eternal Judgment, Admiral Krelvox's flagship, survived the pulse but was crippled. Emergency systems screamed warnings about hull integrity, about failing life support, about quantum drives that were tearing themselves apart. Through his cracked view screen, Krelvox saw the indomitable will approaching, its dark hull unmarked despite the sustained assault. A communication channel opened. Captain Rodriguez's voice was calm, almost gentle. "Admiral, withdraw your remaining vessels. We will not pursue. But if you ever enter Sol system again, if you ever threaten Earth or any human world, we will not be as merciful. Tell the Council that humanity is done kneeling. Tell them that the galaxy has a new power to respect. Tell them that we would have been peaceful neighbors, but you chose to make us warriors instead. This is your fault, and we will never forget it." The surviving Council ships limped away, carrying with them a truth that would reshape galactic politics forever. Humanity could not be conquered. Not anymore. In the days that followed, the entire galaxy watched the recordings of the battle. Every species that had ever been subjugated by the Council, every civilization forced to accept inferior status, saw the same thing: hope. If humans could defy the Council, if primitives could build weapons that made the ancient powers tremble, then perhaps the old order wasn't eternal after all. The Galactic Council convened in emergency session, its chambers no longer filled with arrogant certainty, but with something that tasted like fear. Thex Allen, the speaker, addressed the assembly with light patterns that flickered uncertainty. "We face a choice," he said quietly. "We can escalate, can commit our full military might to crushing this human rebellion. But the cost would be enormous and the outcome uncertain. Or we can negotiate, recognize Sol System as sovereign territory, grant humanity the respect we should have offered from the beginning, accept that we were wrong." The vote, when it came, was not unanimous, but it was enough. Sarah Holt received the Council's diplomatic overture while still on their station, surrounded by guards who no longer seemed quite so confident. She read the terms with a face that showed nothing, then transmitted them back to Earth for consideration. The Council offered recognition, trade agreements, mutual defense pacts, everything humanity had begged for 50 years ago, now freely given because refusal was no longer an option. Earth's response came quickly. They accepted the recognition, accepted the sovereignty, accepted the trade rights, but they declined the mutual defense pacts. Humanity would stand alone, would forge its own path among the stars, would never again trust its survival to the goodwill of those who had once laughed at its weakness. And in the outer dark, beyond Neptune's shadow, the indomitable will stood watch, not as an aggressor but as a reminder. A promise built in metal and contained starlight, forged by generations who refused to accept that some dreams weren't worth fighting for. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Humanity would never be dismissed again, not because humans were the strongest or the oldest, or the most advanced, but because they had proven something the Council had forgotten across millennia of unchallenged power. That sometimes, the greatest strength is simply refusing to surrender, refusing to stop building, stop hoping, stop believing that tomorrow can be different from today. The Council had mistaken humanity's patience for weakness, its compliance for cowardice. They learned too late that humans don't give up. They prepare. Director Marcus Chen, 90 years old and watching from Earth's surface, saw the Council's surrender broadcast and allowed himself a single tear. 50 years, 3 generations, countless sacrifices. But humanity had earned its place among the stars not through compliance but through defiance. Not through acceptance but through absolute refusal to accept the unacceptable. The galaxy would remember this day. They would remember the species that built a Dreadnought in secret, that turned generation ships into weapons of liberation, that looked at impossible odds and said one simple, powerful word: no. And in the dark between stars, the indomitable will kept watch, its engines burning eternal. A monument to humanity's most fundamental truth, that we do not yield, we do not surrender, and we will never stop reaching for the stars, no matter who tries to tell us we're not ready. The age of human deference was over. The age of human destiny had begun.